Welcome to Sleepy Dreamer in America, where history isn't loud, it whispers. Here we wander through the forgotten pages of the past, stories of presidents, inventors, dreamers, and mysteries that shaped the heart of America. So settle, close your eyes if you'd like, and let the quiet rhythm of these tales carry you somewhere peaceful, somewhere true. If you love stories that teach, calm, and remind you who we are, hit subscribe and drift through history with me. The Forgotten Love of John and Abigail Adams. Part 1. You're a meeting of minds. It begins not with a revolution, nor with a declaration, but with a quiet evening in the small village of Weymouth, Massachusetts. The year is 1759. Snow lies heavy on the roof of the parsonage, and candlelight spills from its windows like gold caught in glass. Inside, a young woman sits by the fire, her face bent toward a letter she's writing. Not to anyone yet, but to the world itself. Her name is Abigail Smith. She is intelligent, curious, and quietly restless in a world that offers few places for women to speak their minds. Books are her companions, Milton, Pope, the Bible, and she devours them by candlelight after her chores are done. Across the snow-covered road, a young lawyer named John Adams rides home on horseback. He is short, strong, and fiery, his mind a thunderstorm of opinions, his heart beating fast with ambition and doubt. He is 24, already known for his wit, his temper, and his habit of thinking too much. He worries about money, about purpose, about whether his life will amount to anything more than dusty courtrooms and debts. When John first meets Abigail, he does not quite know what to make of her. She is the daughter of a minister, polite, reserved, but her eyes sparkle with something that unnerves him: intellect. He will later admit that he found her not fond, not coquettish, not fond of the flattery of young men, but rather addicted to reading and reflection. It was, for John Adams, love at first debate. Their first conversations are half argument, half flirtation. They talk of literature, of virtue, of the world beyond Massachusetts. John, with his booming voice and stubborn opinions, and Abigail, with her sharp humor and calm insight, find themselves circling each other in thought, like two minds discovering harmony. In her letters, Abigail would later recall, "I could not tell whether you were the most agreeable or most provoking man I had ever met." He loved her intelligence. She loved his energy. He admired her quiet wisdom. She admired his courage. They were from the start two halves of a whole, a union not only of hearts but of ideas. Outside their small world, the colonies simmered with unrest. The French and Indian War had just ended, and whispers of taxes and tyranny began to creep through the taverns. But for now, John and Abigail's thoughts were smaller, centered on love and life and the hope of a shared future. John often rode the miles between Braintree and Weymouth, his horse's hooves echoing in the night. Neighbors would see his lantern flicker past the darkened hills and smile. The young lawyer had found a reason to travel after dusk. Their affection deepened slowly, measured in glances, shared books, and long letters. Abigail's mother once remarked that her daughter was too tender-hearted for the roughness of this world. But Abigail herself was made of stronger stuff, a heart soft enough to love deeply, and a mind strong enough to stand equal with any man. In October of 1764, in the small parish church where Abigail's father had once preached, they married. It was not a grand affair. No lace, no riches, no orchestra, just vows exchanged in the presence of family and the quiet hum of autumn wind. They moved into John's modest house in Braintree, a simple wooden home surrounded by fields and stone walls. There, they began a life together that would become one of the most extraordinary partnerships in American history. Abigail tended to the household and the children who would soon come. John worked as a lawyer, traveling often, chasing cases that might one day bring him respect. Money was scarce. They struggled, as all young couples do, balancing duty with dreams. But they had something rare, a friendship that deepened through every hardship. When John traveled for work, he began to write, and when Abigail replied, something beautiful happened. A dialogue of souls began to unfold. In one early letter, John wrote, "Miss Adorable, by the same token that the bearer hereof sat up with you last night, I hereby order you to give him as many kisses and as many hours of your company after 9 o'clock as he shall please to demand." To which Abigail replied with gentle wit, "Sir, if you were sensible of the pleasure I felt in your company, you would not deny me so often." Their letters were playful, teasing, full of warmth. They spoke of daily life, the children, the weather, the neighbors, but also of philosophy, virtue, and the strange unfolding politics of the colonies. In every line, there was affection. In every word, respect. They would write to each other for the next 40 years, through war, diplomacy, and presidency, through births and deaths, joy and despair, through the creation of a nation itself. Abigail Adams was not a woman content to sit in silence. While John's career grew, she managed the family's small farm, raised children, and engaged in the great questions of her time through her letters. She read widely and thought deeply about freedom, equality, and the role of women in this new world. Years before the word feminist existed, Abigail wrote of the need for men to remember the ladies. But that would come later. For now, in their first years of marriage, their love was their revolution, a partnership of mind and heart that defied the expectations of their age. Picture them now, Abigail sitting by the fire, her hair loosened from the day's work, her quill moving steadily across a sheet of rough paper. Outside, the Massachusetts night hums with crickets. The air smells of wood smoke and pine. John sits at his desk in another town, his candle nearly spent, pausing between sentences as if he can almost feel her presence beside him. Though separated by miles, their hearts move in rhythm, steady, deliberate like the ticking of a clock. In time, that rhythm will carry them through wars, oceans, and the founding of a nation. But tonight, they are simply John and Abigail, two souls bound not by power but by understanding. "I look to that heaven which has blessed me with you," Abigail once wrote, "and I trust it will continue to bestow its choicest blessings." It is a promise of faith, of endurance, and of love that would outlive both of them. Part 2. The language of love and letters. In the early years of their marriage, John and Abigail Adams built a home that was small in size but rich in spirit. Their house in Braintree stood on a rise of land overlooking orchards and meadows. The walls creaked with winter wind. The roof leaked when it rained, yet inside it was filled with warmth, the kind that comes from laughter, conversation, and the steady hum of a shared life. They planted fruit trees. They kept a cow, chickens, and a small vegetable garden. And every evening after chores were done, Abigail would sit by the fire, reading aloud, Milton, Shakespeare, or the Bible, while John listened, nodding thoughtfully, his hand resting beneath his chin. It was not a grand life, but it was a good one. From the beginning, they did not write like husband and wife. They wrote like equals, partners in thought and in feeling. John began almost every letter the same way. "My dearest friend." It was not a formality. It was a declaration that in a world ruled by hierarchy and custom, their marriage was a friendship before all else. Abigail, in turn, called him "my dearest friend," "my ever-beloved," or sometimes, playfully, "Lysander." In return, John called her Portia, after the intelligent, witty heroine of Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice. Through those names, they built a private world, a small kingdom of affection where they could speak freely, safely, tenderly. Letters became their way of thinking together. Whenever John traveled for his legal work, he wrote home, sometimes daily, sometimes at midnight by candlelight, his handwriting hurried but full of energy. Abigail's replies were precise, elegant, and filled with gentle humor. She wrote, not just of the home, but of ideas, politics, education, philosophy. In one early letter, she told John, "To be good and to do good is all we have to do." He admired her wisdom. She, in turn, admired his restless drive. When he doubted himself, she reminded him that greatness was born of duty. When she faltered under the weight of running the farm alone, He wrote back with encouragement, pride, and longing. Together, they learned that love is not only in presence but in persistence, the steady exchange of thought, care, and hope. Their letters followed the rhythm of the seasons. In winter, Abigail wrote of snow-covered fields and children playing by the fire. In spring, she described blossoms on the apple trees and the smell of fresh earth. She told him of births and deaths in the village, of prices at the market, of sermons at church, and always, beneath the details, was the steady pulse of affection. "My dearest friend," she wrote, "I cannot help feeling lonesome without my partner. I wish you were here to sit with me beneath the shade of our great elm." John's replies were tender but often hurried, filled with political debates, courtroom tales, and confessions of weariness. He told her she was his best counselor, and that her words gave him courage to face the world's chaos. While the colonies began to stir with talk of independence, the Adams household became a quiet reflection of that larger revolution. Marriage was built not on authority, but on equality. Abigail voiced her opinions, often strong ones, about education, morality, and the place of women in the world. John listened, sometimes teased, but always respected her mind. In one letter, she warned him playfully, "If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion." John replied with humor, "Depend. Upon it we know better than to repeal our masculine systems." Yet behind the jest, there was something genuine, a shared understanding that the old order was changing. In their letters, the seeds of modern equality were quietly being planted. It is easy to forget that theirs was a marriage of distance. John's work often took him away, weeks, sometimes months at a time, but each separation deepened their connection. In absence, they became more themselves. Their letters were not just love notes. They were dialogues, records of two brilliant, searching minds trying to make sense of their time and their hearts. Abigail's writing grew more confident. John's tone softened. He once confessed, "I never received a letter from you yet," without a heart full of pleasure and emotions that some would call weakness, but which I would not exchange for all the treasures of the Indies. She was his balance, steady when he was restless, hopeful when he was angry, gentle when he was proud, and he, in turn, was her defender, a man who believed in her intellect when few others did. They could not know, of course, that their correspondence would one day become one of the great treasures of American history, a portrait not of war and politics, but of tenderness and trust. Through their letters, we see that the revolution was not just fought on battlefields. It was also lived in kitchens, in lonely rooms, in quiet prayers. Each time they picked up a pen, they defied the idea that love fades with distance. Each envelope carried not only words, but the promise of return. Imagine one of those nights. Abigail sits near the window, her ink drying slowly as a candle burns low. Outside, the wind moves through bare branches. She folds her letter, seals it carefully, and hands it to a courier who will ride through the dark to deliver it to her husband. Hundreds of miles away, John sits beneath another candle, his eyes tired from reading law books, and he opens a letter, her letter. He smiles, he sighs, and for a few precious moments the world becomes small again. Just him, her, and the sound of his heart steadying as he reads. Some loves burn brightly and fade. Theirs glowed steadily, fueled by patience, wit, and devotion. It was a love that believed in conversation, that survived not on passion alone, but on understanding. John and Abigail Adams taught each other, and perhaps us, that love at its truest is an act of listening, that words written with care can keep hearts close even when oceans intervene. "Should I draw you the picture of my heart," Abigail once wrote, "it would be what I hope you still would love." And he did. He always did. Their letters, more than 1,000 of them, became their shared heartbeat, echoing softly through history, reminding us that in the age of revolutions, it was love that kept the world from falling apart. Part 3. Revolution and Separation. By the late 1760s, change was stirring in the colonies. Whispers of rebellion began to drift from taverns to town halls, from sermons to dinner tables. and in the small house at Braintree, John and Abigail Adams listened. John, with his restless intellect, saw injustice in the taxes, the restrictions, the arrogance of the crown. Abigail, with her quiet strength, saw the toll it took on families, the uncertainty, the fear, the hunger that came when trade faltered. The storm that would one day be called the American Revolution was still far off, but they could already feel its wind against their door. In 1774, the colonies sent delegates to Philadelphia to meet in what would become known as the First Continental Congress. John Adams was chosen as one of them. For the first time, he would travel far from home, leaving Abigail to manage everything: the children, the house, the farm, the accounts, the servants. Before he left, they stood together on the doorstep, the air crisp, the morning quiet. Neither said much. They didn't need to. Both knew what duty demanded. Abigail later wrote, "I am more and more convinced that man is a dangerous creature, and that power, whether vested in many or a few, is ever grasping." Her words carried both wisdom and warning, a sign that she understood the stakes of what was coming. When war finally broke out in 1775, their letters became lifelines. Abigail's writing was filled with vivid detail. The echo of cannon fire heard from afar, the smoke rising over Boston, the wounded soldiers passing through town. She described the chaos calmly, almost poetically. Charlestown is laid in ashes. The battle raged with fury. The day, perhaps the most distressing our eyes ever beheld. John's replies came from Congress in Philadelphia. His tone was fiery, determined, but beneath it there was fatigue, the kind that comes from watching a dream take shape through pain. He missed home fiercely. He missed her even more. At home, Abigail became, in her own words, a soldier's wife. She made gunpowder in her kitchen, melted down pewter for bullets, and taught her children to be brave. She lived by candlelight and hope, planting crops with one hand and writing letters with the other. In one of her most famous lines, she wrote, "We live, my dear friend, in times too big for small hearts." Her courage did not roar, it endured. And her endurance gave John the strength to keep going. He once confessed in reply, "Your letter is a cordial to my spirits. It has refreshed me more than a river bath in this sultry season." It's easy to forget that behind the Declaration of Independence, behind all the polished words and parchment, there were moments like this, one person steadying another through the long, uncertain dark. The year that changed everything. John Adams stood in Philadelphia, his mind consumed by the cause of liberty. Abigail stood in Massachusetts, her heart consumed by the hope that he would come home safe. When the Declaration of Independence was adopted, John did not celebrate with parades or music. Instead, he wrote to Abigail, "You will think me transported with enthusiasm, but I am not. I am well aware of the toil and blood and treasure it will cost to maintain this declaration and support and defend these states. Yet, through all the gloom, I can see the rays of light and glory." He saw the dawn of a nation. She saw the shadow of sacrifice. Their letters from this period are almost holy in their quiet balance, one speaking from the field of politics, the other from the heart of the home. Together they tell the story of a war fought not only by armies, but by those who waited, who worried, who wrote. Years passed. Battles came and went. Friends were lost. Fortunes faded. John's absences grew longer. Abigail's burdens heavier, but even through exhaustion their love never frayed. It simply grew quieter, deeper. When John fell ill with exhaustion in Philadelphia, Abigail wrote to him not as a nurse, but as a poet of compassion. "I wish I could send you one of my hugs, the kind that cures melancholy better than medicine." And when she herself grew sick with worry, he wrote back with rare tenderness, "My dearest friend, if I could fly home upon the wings of love, I would be there this night." It is perhaps one of the most human truths in history that even while the world was being remade, what they longed for most was each other. After nearly a decade of separation, The war ended. Peace came at last. John returned home, and for the first time in years, they were together again. Older, wiser, but still the same two souls who had begun this journey in a small house surrounded by apple trees. The reunion was quiet. There were no fireworks, no celebrations, just two people sitting side by side, grateful that the other still breathed. Abigail wrote simply, "The shadows of the past are long, but they have led me back to you." And John, looking at her, knew that no victory, not even independence, could ever equal the peace of coming home. When the guns fell silent, a new kind of noise began, the noise of politics, ambition, reconstruction. But for a brief moment, in those first months after the war, the Adams home was filled not with debates but with laughter. They walked the garden paths again. They read together by candlelight. And at night, when the air was still, they spoke softly, not of battles or treaties, but of the life they still hoped to live. In their quiet moments, they found again what the war had nearly stolen: the simple joy of being two hearts still, writing to each other, even when no paper was needed. In the distance, the young nation stirred. But here, in the small house in Braintree, the revolution was already won. In love, in loyalty, in the letters that outlived the war. Part 4. Diplomacy and Distance. By 1778, the war for independence had become a war of nations. America needed allies, recognition, and the kind of diplomacy that only the bravest, or the most restless, could attempt. John Adams was chosen for the task. He was to sail across the Atlantic to France, to join Benjamin Franklin and others in securing support for the young republic. For Abigail, the news felt like déjà vu, another departure, another uncertain goodbye. But this time, the distance would be far greater. An ocean wide, and the world itself between them. It was winter when he left. Snow muffled the roads and the sky hung low and gray. They stood together on a small hill overlooking their home, the bare branches of the orchard etched against the cold horizon. Abigail held his hand tightly. Her eyes, so often steady, now glistened with tears she tried not to show. John said little. He was a man who faced danger easily, but not goodbyes. Before he mounted his horse, he pressed her hand and whispered, "Courage, my dearest friend. Our separation is but a duty to the country we both love." She nodded. And as he rode away, his figure shrinking down the road, she stood for a long time in the snow, watching until he vanished into the white distance. The voyage to Europe was perilous. Storms raged for weeks. John, who had never been a sailor, grew ill and weary. In the quiet moments below deck, he thought of her, of the firelight at home, of her voice reading aloud, of the way she folded his letters neatly before storing them in her chest. He wrote to her whenever the sea was calm enough to hold a pen. One note, dated mid-voyage, read, "Every wave that rises seems to bear me further from all that I hold dear. Yet every sunrise brings me one day nearer to you." Abigail received his letters months later, their paper yellowed and the ink faintly blurred by salt. She read them slowly, as if each word could bridge the miles between them. In her reply, she wrote, "My thoughts are always with you. When I see the sun rise, I think, he too beholds this same sun. Thus are we not so far apart." Back home, life went on. Though every day carried a trace of longing, Abigail ran the farm with astonishing competence. She oversaw harvests, managed finances, raised their children, and corresponded with local leaders about the effects of the war. She became, in many ways, one of America's first unofficial stateswomen. Neighbors admired her calm authority. Her letters to John were full of insight about trade, politics, and the shape of the new republic. But late at night, when the house fell silent, loneliness crept in. She wrote, "I am sometimes lost in reverie, and my heart wanders to France. I imagine you walking along strange streets, surrounded by voices I cannot hear. It is one of the quiet tragedies of love in an age before telegraphs or telephones, that affection traveled at the speed of wind and tide. Weeks, sometimes months, passed between question and reply. Yet somehow their bond did not fade. It only grew more patient. John Adams arrived in France to find himself in a world far from home. Paris was bright, extravagant, full of wit and intrigue. He was by nature blunt, a man of reason among courtiers of charm. Benjamin Franklin thrived in this world of salons and candlelit dinners. John did not. He wrote to Abigail, "I find the manners of these people strange. They talk much but mean little. I miss your honesty, your Puritan simplicity." And she replied, "You must learn to endure their finery as one endures a winter storm, with patience and a sense of humor." Even from an ocean away, she understood him better than anyone. Their letters from this time blend politics with intimacy, the affairs of nations intertwined with the affairs of the heart. He described treaties. She described home. He spoke of kings. She spoke of crops. Together they built a bridge of words across the sea. Years passed. John's duties expanded. He was sent to negotiate peace, to shape the treaties that would end the war and define the young Republic. Abigail, meanwhile, kept his spirit alive at home. She ensured the children studied well, kept the farm solvent, and watched the news from Europe with quiet pride. In one letter she wrote, "I find myself more the patriot's wife than the farmer's, and yet it is in the tending of our small plot of earth that I find the truest peace." Sometimes weeks went by with no word from him. When letters finally arrived, she read them by the fire, slowly, carefully, as though afraid they might vanish if rushed. "No one," she once wrote, "can tell what I suffer from the long absence of my dearest friend. Yet I glory in his cause and pray for his success." Her words were not the language of complaint, but of endurance, a kind of love that does not demand, only waits and believes. At last, after 5 long years, Abigail received an invitation to join John in Europe. The war was over, and America was now a nation. Their time apart had stretched nearly to a decade. The journey was long and uncertain, but she agreed. In 1784, she and their daughter Nabby set sail for France. When the ship finally reached the harbor, John was waiting at the dock. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, as if trying to reconcile memory with the living person before them. Then he took her hand, and they walked together through the narrow streets of Paris. 2 Americans far from home, bound by the same old friendship that had begun decades before under the elm tree in Braintree. That night, she wrote in her journal, "After so long an absence, I am once more with him who is dearest to my heart. No words can express the joy, nor the gratitude I feel." In Paris, they were introduced to a different rhythm of life. Concerts, salons, foreign tongues, and evenings spent among philosophers and diplomats. Abigail found herself both dazzled and bemused. She wrote to friends back home, "I find Paris too full of display and show. I long for the simple dignity of New England." Yet she adjusted with grace. She became John's partner in diplomacy, advising him, hosting dinners, and helping him navigate the complex world of European politics. Their love, once tested by distance, now grew through companionship, quiet walks, shared meals, and laughter, over misunderstandings of language and custom. In letters from this time, they sound almost young again, playful, teasing, and deeply affectionate. It was as if, after so much separation, they had earned the right to simply be together. In a world that celebrated heroes for battles won, John and Abigail Adams won a quieter victory, the victory of 2 souls who refused to let time, distance, or duty extinguish the flame between them. They learned that love, like liberty, is not granted once and kept forever. It must be renewed letter by letter, day by day, heart by patient heart. Part 5, Unit Return and Reflection. After nearly 10 years abroad, John and Abigail Adams returned home to America, a nation now free but fragile. The year was 1788. They had crossed oceans and decades, and at last, their journey circled back to where it began, a modest home. In Massachusetts, a garden, and the familiar scent of apple blossoms in spring. For the first time in a long time, they were simply John and Abigail again. Not diplomats, not patriots, but husband and wife. America was changing. The Constitution had been signed. George Washington had become president. The country was young, hopeful, uncertain. John, though weary from years of service, could not rest for long. He was soon chosen as the first Vice President of the United States. Abigail, by his side, became a silent but steady presence, not seeking recognition, but shaping it through her counsel, her letters, her quiet wisdom. In one letter to a friend she wrote, "We are but pilgrims still. The work of liberty is not done. It begins anew in every heart that cherishes it." Her words carried the weight of experience, for she had seen liberty's price, measured in sleepless nights and lonely years. In New York and later Philadelphia, where the capital moved, Abigail found herself at the center of a new society. Political dinners, receptions, and formal visits filled her days, yet she never lost her simplicity. She observed the pomp with amusement, writing to her sister, I'm obliged to play the part of ceremony, though my heart would rather be in a quiet parlor, with my books and my knitting." She saw through the glitter to the people beneath, the rivalries, the ambitions, and the fragile humanity that held the new republic together. To John, she remained the same compass she had always been. Her letters continued to advise, soothe, and sharpen him. In one note she reminded him gently, "Remember, my dearest friend, that no office can make you more than you already are, a man of principle." And he replied, "You are my ballast, Abigail. Without you, I am but a ship adrift." In 1796, after Washington stepped down, John Adams became the second president of the United States. The day he took office, Abigail stood beside him, calm, dignified, thoughtful. She was the first to live in the newly built White House, though at the time it was little more than a shell. Walls bare, halls echoing, the grounds a sea of mud. She wrote to a friend, half amused, "I have come to live in a palace, but one without finish. We must hang our clothes in the great audience hall, and I dry mine before the East Room fire." Yet even in this unfinished mansion she saw beauty. She placed flowers in the windows, lit candles at night, and turned emptiness into home. It was in this house that she wrote one of her most tender letters. "I pray heaven to bestow the best of blessings on this house, and on all that shall hereafter inhabit it. May none but honest and wise men ever rule under this roof." Her words still echo today, inscribed on a fireplace mantel inside the White House, a whisper from the past, still guiding the present. John's presidency was not an easy one. He inherited a divided nation, factions forming, tempers rising, the ideals of the revolution beginning to fray. Foreign threats loomed, and within his own cabinet rivals circled. Abigail watched him age under the strain. She saw the lines deepen around his eyes, the fatigue settle into his voice. In her letters, she offered him balance, reminding him that honor mattered more than popularity. "Do not be discouraged, my friend," she wrote. "To be faithful to conscience is the truest success, even when the world misunderstands." Her words became his refuge, a soft place to land amid the noise of politics. When his term ended, and Thomas Jefferson, once his friend, now his rival, took office, the Adamses quietly left Washington and returned to Quincy. There was no bitterness in her heart, only relief that at last they could rest. Their years after politics were peaceful. John tended to his farm again, walked among the apple trees, read Shakespeare by the window. Abigail managed the home, corresponded with family, and welcomed grandchildren into her lap. Together they watched America grow, sometimes proudly, sometimes anxiously. They wrote fewer letters now, for at last they could simply talk. Their evenings were filled with gentle conversation, reflections on youth, on loss, on the strange fortune of having lived through so much. One evening, John said softly, "We have outlived the world we once fought to create." Abigail smiled and replied, "Then let us be grateful to have built something that endures beyond us." The years wore gently on. Their children built lives of their own. Their son, John Quincy Adams, would one day follow his father's path. becoming the 6th President of the United States. Abigail's health began to fade in the early 1800s. Yet even as her body weakened, her spirit remained bright. She continued to write letters to friends, to family, filled with wit, grace, and a serene understanding of life's brevity. When she died in 1818, John was heartbroken, but his grief was quiet. The kind that hums low, the kind that knows the blessing of having loved deeply. He wrote of her simply, "She was my friend, my guide, my philosopher, and my greatest blessing." After her death, John lived for 8 more years. He spent his days writing letters to his son and to old friends, including Thomas Jefferson, with whom he reconciled after decades of silence. Their correspondence became a meditation on time, 2 old men looking back on a shared dream. John often thought of Abigail during those long evenings. He spoke of her not as one gone, but as one still near, part of the air, part of his memory, part of the peace he felt at last. He said once, "I wish I could lay my head on her bosom and die there." When his time came in 1826, the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, his final words were of her and of his old friend Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson survives. He murmured. He did not know that Jefferson had passed away just hours earlier, as if the 2 founders had kept their final appointment with history together. In the end, John and Abigail Adams gave America more than politics or principle. They gave it an example of partnership, of patience, of love that endures through absence and age. Theirs was not a story of grand romance, but of quiet devotion, the kind that lasts because it listens, that survives because it serves. Their letters, the 1,000 small bridges they built between 2 hearts, remain among the most intimate records of love ever written in a nation's name. They remind us that even among the noise of history, what matters most is the stillness between 2 souls who never stopped calling each other my dearest friend. Part 6. Legacy of Letters. Time, like an old friend, eventually carries every story away. But some stories, the rare and tender ones, leave traces that never fade. The story of John and Abigail Adams is one such trace. Their words remain, ink pressed into paper, paper pressed into memory, and memory pressed gently into history's heart. Across more than 1,000 letters, they built a bridge not only between themselves, but between the personal and the political, between love and the making of a nation. They showed that a country can be built with laws and courage, but also with kindness, conversation, and trust. Imagine one of their letters now, the paper yellowed, the edges soft from centuries of hands. The ink, once black, has faded to a brown whisper. Yet when you read it, the voices return. Abigail's graceful hand, John's hurried script. The rhythm of their affection still pulsing beneath every word. "My dearest friend," she writes, "though distance divides us, it cannot diminish our affection." "Portia," he answers, "you are the balm to my restless heart. My only wish is that time and duty may soon restore me to your side." Even now, those words feel alive, as if they were written not 2 centuries ago, but only yesterday. It is through such letters that we remember that history is not made of marble or monuments, but of people, fragile, hopeful, longing. When we think of the American Revolution, we often picture battlefields, declarations, speeches, but between those thunderous moments lay the quiet heartbeat of ordinary life, the lives of those who waited, who hoped, who kept the flame burning. At home, Abigail Adams was one of them, a woman whose courage did not roar but endured. Her revolution was made of ink and patience, of steadfast love and moral clarity. John, for all his bluster and ambition, was softened by her presence. In her letters, we glimpse not the statesman, but the husband, the man who doubted, who feared, who needed. Through her words, we see how love itself can be a kind of governance, a daily act of faith, a steadying of the spirit amid uncertainty. There is something timeless in their union. In an age when marriage often meant hierarchy, they practiced equality, They disagreed, debated, and yet always found their way back to understanding. When Abigail challenged John to remember the ladies, it was not merely playful, it was prophetic. It was the voice of the future speaking softly into the ear of power, and John, though he teased her in reply, never dismissed her wisdom. He valued it. He built upon it. Their letters read not as relics, but as conversations still unfolding, a model of partnership that feels startlingly modern even now. There is a quiet magic in writing, the way a thought leaves one mind, travels across space and enters another, unharmed by time or distance. John and Abigail understood this deeply. They lived their love through words. When they could not hold hands, they held sentences. When they could not share a room, they shared ideas. And in doing so, they left behind something no monument could match, a living archive of intimacy. Their letters do not only tell what happened, they tell how it felt, the loneliness, the laughter, the thousand small moments that history books forget. If you listen closely, their correspondence sounds less like politics and more like poetry. There are lines of duty, but between them, lines of longing. There are words about liberty, but beneath them, the quiet yearning for one another's presence. They remind us that even the great figures of history were, at their core, simply human beings, trying to do right, to endure, to love. Perhaps that is the truest lesson of their story, that every era of greatness is built not only by visionaries, but by the tender hearts who keep those visionaries human. The letters of John and Abigail Adams are now kept in archives, libraries, and books. Students study them, historians quote them, lovers rediscover them. Yet when read aloud, slowly, gently, they sound less like documents and more like lullabies from another age. You can almost hear the quill stroke, the sigh between sentences, the candle guttering as night deepens, and in that sound, that hush between ink and silence, you hear something eternal, the pulse of devotion, still beating after all this time. We live now in an age of instant messages and fleeting words, but the Adamses remind us that true connection is built slowly, in listening, in patience, in thought. Their love endured not because it was grand, but because it was grounded. Not because it escaped hardship, but because it grew through it. Abigail once wrote, "Distance is nothing when one has motive." And John, in his old age, echoed her sentiment, "Affection is the air I breathe. Without it, I should perish." Together they left us a map, a way of loving that transcends circumstance, that finds peace not in perfection, but in persistence. Let us imagine, for a moment, that the story closes not with death, but with one more letter. A letter never sent, but always waiting in the air. Perhaps it begins like this. My dearest friend, though time has carried us beyond the reach of ink and paper, I still feel your words near me. They are the light by which I read the world. The garden blooms again, and I find you in every leaf, in every quiet hour. What we wrote was not only to each other, but to all who come after, that love may yet be the firmest foundation of liberty, and perhaps somewhere beyond the noise of centuries, Abigail's voice answers, calm and kind. My friend, our hearts have spoken enough. Let the silence now say the rest. In the hush that follows, their story remains. Two voices across time, still reaching for one another, still reminding us that in the vast sweep of history, the truest revolutions begin not with cannon fire, but with a pen and the simple words, my dearest friend. Please, the eternal conversation. History moves on, but echoes never truly fade. Centuries after John and Abigail Adams lived, their letters still cross oceans of time, arriving in classrooms, in libraries, and sometimes in the hearts of those who stumble upon them by accident. They have outlived wars, presidents, and all the noisy urgency of the world that once surrounded them. What remains is not politics or power, but the quiet honesty of two people trying to stay kind in a hard and uncertain world. When you read their words today, you can feel the texture of life in another century, the scratch of a quill, the flicker of a candle, The pause before sealing a letter and sending it across the sea. In that pause, there is something eternal, the small, sacred act of reaching out. Every My Dearest Friend was a reminder that even in revolution, in absence, in grief, love could still be an anchor. Perhaps that's why their letters have lasted, because beneath every thought of liberty or duty was something deeply human, a tenderness that refused to surrender to distance. John and Abigail's story is not about perfection. It's about persistence. It teaches us that love does not mean constant harmony. It means constant return. Return to patience. Return to listening. Return to that quiet place where affection begins again. When the world feels loud, their words remind us that peace can exist in the space between two sentences. When hope feels fragile, their courage reminds us that endurance itself can be a form of faith. And when loneliness feels too heavy to carry, their story tells us, you are not alone in waiting, or in longing, or in believing that words can hold someone close. The years pass, the ink fades, but the feeling does not. Somewhere, perhaps tonight, someone opens a collection of their letters and smiles. Maybe they recognize themselves in those pages, their own worries, their own hopes, their own wish to be understood, across distance. And in that small recognition, the Adamses live again, not as marble statues, but as human hearts, still whispering, still loving, still reaching. Morning returns, and with it the world turns once more. History is, in the end, a conversation between the living and the dead. When we listen, we keep that conversation alive. John and Abigail Adams spoke across oceans, across wars, across time, and somehow, their voices found their way to us. Perhaps that is their greatest legacy. Not just a nation they helped shape, but a language of love and principle that still speaks in quiet hearts today. Every word we write is a little echo of ourselves. Abigail knew this. So did John. Their letters were not just messages. They were pieces of their souls, offered to one another and, unknowingly, to all of us. And so when we read them, we're not merely studying history. We are continuing their dialogue. Each reader, each listener, adds another heartbeat to that ongoing rhythm. It is as if love itself found a way to speak beyond the limits of time and breath. Imagine now the last candle burning low in the Adams home in Quincy. The windows are dark. The night is still. John sits alone, an old man surrounded by memories. He lifts one of Abigail's letters. The paper fragile, the words still clear. He reads the familiar greeting, "My dearest friend." A small smile crosses his face. The fire crackles softly, and in that moment there is no distance between them at all. Only warmth, only peace, only the quiet companionship that endures when all else is gone. Their story ends as all true stories. Stories not with finality, but with continuation. Because love like theirs does not vanish into history. It becomes history's heartbeat. It lives on in the words they left behind, in the ideals they shaped, in the gentle truth that even the greatest revolutions are born from something deeply personal. The wish to care for one another, to be heard, to be loved. So as the world grows quiet tonight and you close your eyes, listen. You might still hear them, those two familiar voices drifting softly through time, trading thoughts beneath candlelight, ending every letter the E. Same way. Forever thine, forever mine, forever us. And with that, the story of John and Abigail Adams comes to a close. A lullaby of love, history, and the letters that refuse to fade.